Hello everyone. As you can see from the title of the video, this is a critique of Mike Israetel's philosophy. So, first of all, before I say anything, Mike Israetel is absolutely awesome. I absolutely love that guy. He has a tremendous sense of humor, he knows a bunch of things, and if you're not familiar with him, Mike Israetel is basically a sports scientist. He has a PhD in sports science, and so he made a huge channel and also a few apps, if I'm not mistaken, about fitness and how to build muscle. And in those respects, he is actually an expert, and he has helped me personally a lot. So he creates amazing videos about muscle growth and stuff like that. Awesome. Recently, about a year ago, Mike Israetel created a new channel in which he speaks on other topics that are unrelated or at least not closely related to fitness. This channel is called Mike Israetel Making Progress. And it's basically about philosophical concepts and personal growth, politics, all of that stuff blended together. But the best way I would put it is basically something like a pragmatic philosophy channel where he talks about his beliefs about what life is about, how we should live, and how that changes our opinions in politics and also when it comes to progress in general. And in this video, I'm trying to critique the philosophy that he promotes in that channel. Now, I'm not going to get into some specific topic where we disagree or anything about politics or stuff like that. I'm not really interested in that. In fact, I mostly agree with him in most topics, if I'm being honest. The problem I have is the fundamentals of his philosophy, like the grounding of his philosophical ideas and more particularly why he thinks the stuff that he thinks about. Let me explain. If you go to the Mike Israetel Making Progress channel, you will find that the very first video is what is the meaning of your life? And the kind of subtitle that he wants to give to that is something like working towards an objective meaning. And it's very murky, to be honest, because the essence of what Dr. Mike, means when he says objective is really mysterious to me, because he seems to sort of disguise the word universal with the word objective. So to make a pretty simple distinction here, some things can be universally accepted. So, for example, maybe you have a world where it is universally accepted that the color red is more beautiful than the color blue. It is universally accepted by literally everyone. But in some sense, this doesn't make it so that red is actually more beautiful than blue. Like, in fact, in reality, it's not a fact that red is more beautiful than blue just because most people or even all people think that. It is fundamentally a subjective subjective evaluation. So even if a subjective evaluation is done pretty much universally, it still doesn't make it objectively correct or objectively true. Now, in examples where something is literally universal, like everybody actually believes X, you could make the case that, okay, it's not objectively true, but it doesn't really matter. And I hear you, that's a pragmatic way to solve problems. But when it comes to ethical dilemmas, ethical problems, or generally the foundation of thought and the foundation of our moral beliefs, when you have the majority of people who agree on something, and it's not like literally everyone, first of all, and secondly, it's of really high significance, it's probably very important to give reasons why you think that that's the case. So, for example, I'm going to get straight to this. Mike Israetel makes the claim that basically living is good. Simple claim, right? So just being in life, being alive, is better than not being there. And, he has a sort of very common sense approach to this, which is, well, if you ask the average person, would you rather live or die, they will tell you they would rather live. But this doesn't actually constitute a reason to really believe that living is objectively preferable to not living. Let me delve way deeper into this and explain what I mean. Now, here's the problem. When you're making a video that's called "What is the meaning of your life?" and the purpose of the video is to give a sort of as objective as possible guide to understanding what the meaning of everyone's life is, you have to understand that the question you're trying to answer is, why should I live? Why should you live? What is the meaning behind your life? So what Mike does is he makes a bunch of postulates about meaningfulness, about the meaningfulness of your life. But they're all sort of hanging from the first postulate he makes, which is the one that I mentioned before, that living is good. His postulates are about, I am prioritizing living now, and as a second priority, although very close, living later, so survivability, stuff like that. But all of that hangs from that first claim that living is good, like being alive is better than being dead. And the problem with that is that you're literally assuming the conclusion of the problem you're trying to solve. You're assuming it without giving any sort of justification. The problem you're trying to solve is, why should I live? Why should you live? Why should he live? Why should she live? And etc. So when you're asking this question and you say, well, I'm just going to assume that living is better than being dead, you're just assuming the answer. You're not giving any reason for it. In fact, there is a very peculiar small section of the video where he comes back to this first postulate, and he says, if we assume that living is good and everyone does, and if you don't, whatever. Like, he literally says that. He says, if you don't, whatever. There is a big problem here. You're trying to solve this problem, which is, why should I live? And instead of providing answers for that problem, you're essentially saying, well, I'm just going to assume that you should live, and here's what you should prioritize since you want to live. But that's not the point, really. Like, the point is, why should you live in the first place? Why would you prefer life to death in the first place? And Mike doesn't seem to have any answer to that other than most people think that, or saying that, if you don't, you're somehow insane. It's very funny when you see people who talk with common sense a lot, and common sense is a good thing. Like, you should be a person who has the ability to think with common sense. But the problem is, a lot of times, they will sort of make a claim that sounds intuitively super correct, and it's like, well, that's obviously the case, let's move on. But sometimes the things that are so intuitive are big problems that are almost unsolvable. And especially in philosophy, one of the biggest problems is, why should you live? Like, what is the meaning of life? But I have a couple of hypotheses as to why Mike Israetel sort of assumes that life is good without any justification. And it's sort of two things. The first is that Mike Israetel is an extremely scientifically minded person. Like, he's very scientifically minded. He is a scientist. And whenever he talks about philosophical problems, he always tries to sort of bring them down to data and, empirically verifiable stuff that you can solve. And that's a good thing, mostly. The problem is that there is a very big distinction between things that describe how things work and things that describe why things should work or shouldn't work. There's a big difference between the kinds of questions that are solved through scientific inquiry and the kind of questions that are solved through philosophical inquiry. So, the kind of question that is, what is the meaning of your life, simply isn't the kind of question that is solved through, scientific inquiry. You cannot add a bunch of things or, measure something and find a solution to what is the meaning of life, unless you do the sort of thing that Mike Israetel does, which is just assume that life is meaningful and then let's see how to maximize that. But just assuming it is like ignoring the problem. And we found that out when the logical positivists came into the scene. I'm pretty sure that Mike Israetel is familiar with logical positivism because he seems to know a lot of things about philosophy. But basically, the logical positivists claimed that, they tried to make philosophy sort of more scientific, and they claimed that anything that isn't empirically verifiable or a tautology is just absurd and meaningless. And I'm not claiming that Mike thinks that. I don't think that he thinks that. But I do think that his way of thinking sort of is very close to the logical positivists, where he just won't dispute the fundamental assumptions, the fundamental postulates, if you wish, that we operate under. And one of those postulates seems to be that we want to live, we want to better the world and stuff, but not just better the world, we want to be in the world. That's sort of one of the postulates that every living person or most living persons lives by. And so he's simply not willing to dispute that, because disputing that would literally make the meaning of life not a problem that can be solved mechanistically. It would be a problem that has to be solved purely philosophically. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think he's very influenced by Ayn Rand. And he himself has said so, that, he has read a lot of Ayn Rand and he agrees with many of the things that she says, although not everything. But I think he's very influenced by Ayn Rand in the sense of what matters, in the sense of value. Because one of the things that Ayn Rand does is she simply postulates that because your life is the only thing that you have, it has to be that which is most valuable, right? So it's the one thing that you have, the one thing that is immediate to you, etc. And so it is the thing that is valuable. But I don't think this reasoning works. I think you need a justification. Here's another way to put this. There is, at least if I'm not mistaken, 100,000 people who commit suicide every year. Now, these are people who live and who choose to end their lives. So, in some real sense, these people think that being dead is preferable to being alive. And other than those 100,000 people, there's also a whole lot more who have an existential crisis. And what is an existential crisis? Well, it is obviously a personal crisis in which you sort of lose the sense of meaning that life has when you don't really think about it. So basically, it's when people really think about what the meaning of life is, and they seem to find that there is a big hole there, right? They become nihilistic. They think that life isn't valuable. And my question to Dr. Mike is, what do you say to those people? Because your video seems to be directed, at least somewhat, to the people who are asking this question, right? So, what is the meaning of life? And if your point is, well, I'm just going to assume that living is better than being dead, then I guess you're not providing any answers to those people. You're not giving them a reason to live. You're just saying, well, it's a matter of postulate. It's just something that I assume. But just assuming something doesn't prove it. It's not a reason to think it, right? So, and just saying that, well, every healthy person thinks that isn't a reason to think that. And it's also not true. Because I am a person who has doubted that. I don't think that I'm insane for doubting that. And funnily enough, I'm one of the people who agrees very, very strongly that life is objectively good. But I have a whole foundation, a whole ethical foundation and philosophical foundation that explains why that is the case. But simply saying, well, it's just a matter of postulates, doesn't do anything. It's at best, it's sort of a consensus-seeking thing. It's like saying, well, look, all of us think that life is good, so why would you be an outsider? Why would you, come with us? We think that. Come think this along with us. And I don't like that. I'm a very libertarian person. I want to think freely. And so since I want to think freely, I want to have a reason to think the things I think. So just saying that a lot of people, or a lot of healthy, whatever that means, people think that life is good, does not constitute a reason for me to believe that. In fact, there is a whole subset of people who are called negative utilitarians who seem to think that actually not living is preferable to living. Because they say, well, look, in reality, we all just want to avoid suffering, so if you just want to avoid suffering, why not commit a painless mass death? What's the problem with that? And I'm not saying they're correct. In fact, if you have seen my channel, I am constantly trying to debate against that position, and specifically antinatalists who say that we shouldn't create new beings because we basically make them suffer without their consent. And this whole channel has always been against this position. But I would never say something like, well, you're just insane for thinking that, or, I'm just assuming that you're wrong. That doesn't seem like arguing. That seems like just sort of conviction. And conviction is important, but it doesn't win arguments. Unless you're doing bad tactics or bad faith arguments and stuff like that, which Mike doesn't do. Mike is actually a very good faith person. So my sort of challenge to Mike Israetel, even though he will probably never see this video, is to actually come up with some sort of reason as to why he thinks that living is good. Why would you want to promote more life? Why do you think that's sort of the fundamental value of living? Why is that meaningful? Because people may say, maybe many people may say, you know what, this Dr. Mike guy, well, he might be right that in some sense that, for social cohesion and stuff, it's important to think that living is good. But objectively, it's not meaningful to me, so it doesn't really seem that way to me. And I would really want to see, what kind of answer would Dr. Mike give to those people, other than just a sort of dismissal of, well, you're either insane or a bad faith actor, or you don't really think that, or something like that. These are not responses. I would like to see an actual reason as to why you think that your foundation of philosophy, your philosophical foundation, is correct. Because you seem to just assume what you believe. You seem to assume that promoting life is good, and therefore here is a bunch of mechanisms, and the whole channel has many great mechanisms that promote life. Here's a bunch of mechanisms that promote and better our lives. Okay, but you haven't given an actual reason for your foundation in the first place. That's basically my contention. And don't get me wrong, the sort of thinking that Mike Israetel does, even in that video, is actually very useful. Like it seems that his whole productions, his whole videos are aimed to be extremely useful in a pragmatic sense. And I really respect that. But sometimes there is a difference between what is pragmatic and what is true. So, if you want to make a meta-ethical video, which is basically what the meaning of life video is about, you should probably give some sort of reasoning as to why you think that your meta-ethical positions hold true. Like just saying that there is consensus or it seems right, that doesn't do justice to the question. There's a lot of people who want to know, why should I live? And they don't seem to just assume it from the first place that living is good. And so if you want to make a foundation for your moral philosophy, you should probably have some kind of reasoning that goes behind that. That's all I'm saying. Again, I love Mike Israetel. His advice is mostly really fucking good. I really like the fact that when it comes to political stuff, especially, he seems to be very clear-minded. He doesn't seem very propagandized or stuff like that. And I'm actually really in agreement with most of the pragmatic stuff that he says. I just don't see how his philosophical foundation gives any sort of reason behind why you should accept it. And also, before I close the video, I want to say, because I've heard Mike Israetel say that if someone says that they don't think that living is better than death, then you're sort of just looking at a hypocrite, because they still live and they still go and eat and stuff like that. I just want to say that it doesn't have to be a hypocrite. In fact, people may continue to live for completely different reasons than the reason of valuing existence or valuing life. Like, for example, someone may be like, well, I would like to have a painless, just death and cease to exist, but I wouldn't want to make my parents sort of suffer my death, or I wouldn't like to let other people down. I have a whole life here, and if I live, I will create a lot of suffering to other people. So people may continue to live and still not think that living is valuable. So I just wanted to say that because I don't think it's a good objection. So, in conclusion, Mike Israetel is a great guy. I just think that his foundations for his philosophy are very murky, and I would really love for him to clarify those. And so, that's it. See you next time.